Hospital Porter's Pride and Dignity. Stop the New World Order. Welcome to Hapanwo TV. Well, guess where I am, guys? I am actually at the University Parks, Mesopotamia again. It's a beautiful location. It's become quite overgrown since I last walked along here. Yeah, did you see Slaxer was here the other day? He put up a video of him on a punt. So I'll look out for Slaxer in case he wants to go punting again. It's a bit dark and grey today, but I'll tell you, it's still pretty warm. We have had a little heat wave here just for a couple of days. Not like they have had in France where it's 45 degrees. But of course I'm doing my usual. I'm walking along through University Parks, my favourite way to town. And as I say, it's a bit out of my direction, but I go along here just simply because it's much more pleasant. It takes longer, but it's much more pleasant. And I'm actually heading, I'll tell you where I'm going in a minute, but I'll just give you a bit of update because I feel my sciatica kicking in again now. Usually it's after I've been walking for about an hour. That's when my sciatica kicks in, it's about an hour since I left home, and my sciatica is starting to niggle a bit. I don't know if you ever had sciatica. It's not nice. I talked a bit about it in my Still Ill video a couple of weeks ago. It can get really bad. I mean, like, you know, sort of like I have to stop and it's like eye-watering, gasping type pain in my leg, like almost like electric shocks or stabbing or something. It's nasty. But you'll be pleased to know on my illness that I had, my flu-like illness is gone. It did go away. Of course, it wasn't going to last forever, but it's just, as I say, it's just an unusual kind of illness in that respect. Also, my other main health problems I'm dealing with, I've started doing exercises for my hernia, which I'm going to hopefully make it shrink a bit. Whether it will heal it completely, I don't know, but it'll make it smaller. You don't need. There's plenty. If you have a hernia and you want to get rid of it, they'll put you in for an operation at the doctor's, and you've got to wait like 2 years on a waiting list and things like that, and it gets cancelled at the last minute. I remember this when I was a porter. You can heal hernias without surgery. There's lots of ways of doing it using exercises and trusses and things like that, which I'm looking at now. I'm also doing exercises to try and alleviate the sciatica. There's lots of those you can do. Some yoga positions as well, which I'm doing. So I'm in control of this situation now. You'll be glad to know. I'm also taking steps to protect myself psychically against what may well be a psychic attack against me, a hex that has been put on me, which is why I've had these health problems over the last 12 to 14 months. I'm taking steps to deal with that as well. And of course some of you will say, oh Ben, you're imagining things. It's not that. Well, possibly, but if it is, well, I'm not. I've got nothing to lose by still taking those precautions. And there's a punt over there. Do you see the punt? That there is a Oxford punt, and it's moored over there. I think some people just sitting there on the bank enjoying the river. And that is a standard Oxford pastime. That is messing about in the water, like Slaxer was doing. Anyway, get to the point, Ben. Get to the point. I know you're all saying. All right, I'll get to the point. This is another movie roving review. I'm going to the cinema again. I'm going to the one where I went to see Dr. Strangelove. I think was that the last movie roving review I did. I think it might have been. It's the one on Walton Street. I'm going to the Phoenix Picture House in Walton Street. Or Phoenix Picture Palace. Sorry, the Phoenix Picture Palace. Palace. I mustn't downplay it. To watch a film called Apollo 11. Now this is a documentary. It's a feature-length documentary that's been released. Now it's not often. It's quite rare to get documentaries on the big screen. I mean, it's probably more likely in sort of art house flick places, which is what the Phoenix is, rather than say your Odeon or your View, you know, made general release. Which they're almost all feature films, fictional feature films. This is a documentary. It's a feature-length documentary. I have seen documentaries on the big screen before, but it's quite unusual. Oof. Yeah, my sciatica's starting to bite a bit. It's like burning in my legs. Hopefully the exercises I'm doing will get rid of it soon. haven't done them today yet. Actually, I'll do them I'll do them later. I'm going to see a film called Apollo 11. Now, Apollo 11, of course, is a space mission. It is the NASA space mission that put the first men on the moon, allegedly. And we're coming up to the 50th anniversary of that. In fact, on the 16th of July, it'll be the 50th anniversary of the launch of that mission. On the 20th of July, it'll be the 50th anniversary of the actual moon landing. And on the 24th of July, it'll be the actual moment that'll be the day the craft landed back on Earth in the Pacific Ocean, the command module. So we now have we're going through this 50th anniversary position. Now it's interesting actually that these anniversaries are always very useful for analysers and researchers and people and activists who are interested in promoting maybe an alternative view of things and question the official narrative of things, because it's what I call an informational choke point. The actual information goes into a narrow slot where it's subjected to scrutiny it wouldn't normally be, especially considering it happened so long ago. It's as I said, 50 years, a long time before I was born. It's this half-century thing. It's like there's going to be a lot of mainstream media coverage of this, and indeed the film I'm going to see is one of those things, to try and give a certain impression of what actually happened. Now, as you know, ever since it happened, ever since Bill Casing wrote his book, which is titled I can't remember, ever since that came out, people have questioned the official story of the Apollo moon missions. And I'm one of them, as you know if you're a regular viewer. I'll refer you to my Apollo Detectives series of films. In fact, there's actually I've just recorded a new one of those Apollo Detectives, the fourth one I believe, is the fourth or the fifth Apollo Detectives video. We've done a series of them anyway. I got together with Neil Geddes Ward, who is the director of this particular series, and I did a dialogue with a group of excellent researchers who have specialised in this subject. Marcus Allen, of course, who you'll be familiar with if you watch regularly. He's been on all of them so far. Jarrah White, an Australian chap who specialises in this. Trevor Weaver, another British researcher who just published a book about it. Was going to publish a new book. He's published one book. He's publishing another on the 20th of July. It's coming out on the moon landing 50th anniversary day. So it was very, very interesting. Now, I know a lot of the comments. I'll be addressing this in the actual video itself, in the preamble. But of course, we couldn't get a NASA supporter to come on the show. Now, as you know, this is what you guys wanted. Well, we really tried to get a NASA supporter to come on the show, and they wouldn't. Okay, so we did try. So it is just us again. But I'll say more about that when the video comes out, because I'll be uploading my own copy of it. The mainstream media, of course, this is important to do these things now, because the mainstream media will, of course, be pulling out the stops. They are doubling down on this. The mainstream position, that NASA are maintaining their position. The position being that 50 years ago they landed 2 men on the moon, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. They landed them on the moon, they returned them safely to Earth. And that was followed up by 5 more missions. They are maintaining that. Oh, I've got to stop a minute. Ooh, blimey. Oh, yeah, just got to stop a moment. If I stand still, it goes away. Oh, dear. Oh, I've got to do something about it. Send me healing thoughts, guys, if you... So NASA are maintaining their position. They're maintaining the mainstream position. As I said, I've said before about the UFO disclosure issue. This is probably one of the things they can't just come out and say. There's no way that the political structures of this Earth have the capacity to absorb revelation of this magnitude. So really, doubling down is the only thing they can do. I mean, they've dug themselves a hole now they really can't get out of, and all they can do now is keep digging. The truth is not going to come out probably with a confession from them. It's going to come out probably the same way the truth about the Bilderberg group came out, through grassroots activism. I mean, you've got to remember that the Bilderberg group... let's keep walking now. The Bilderberg group was a completely secret organisation until Big Jim Tucker and etc. And then it came out. It's now got a semi-public face. Oh man, oh, I'm gonna have to actually sit. So look at the time. I think I'm doing all right for time. And I've got a feeling that the moon landings will probably be the same as will the UFOs. There's already signs that that's happening with the UFOs. But that's a story for another video. I am going to do another UFO disclosure video in the next few days. Oh, I'm just going to sit on this log here a minute. Just got to sit down and wait for it to go away. Oh, stretch my leg out. Oh, I feel like an old man. Oh, my leg. Oh, I've got such a job to walk. Now, so we're now just going to wait and see. But there's going to be another UFO disclosure video. But this documentary is. I won't show you the trailer because, as you know, bloody YouTube. You know what they're like. Oh, can you see me again? Just make sure I get the light contrast right. Bloody YouTube. You know what they're like. They just put a copyright strike automatically on everything, and as I've said before, you show trailer. I include the trailer in some of my movie reviews. They're immediately struck down with third-party strikes. Sometimes they're blocked in various countries. Sometimes one of them was blocked all over the world until I put in an appeal. And you put in an appeal and it's usually lifted, but it takes weeks. It's just not worth it. I'll put a link to the IMDb page, and then you can simply go and look at the trailer for yourself. It saves a lot of bother. It really, really does. So that's what I'm going to do. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to go into the cinema. I'm going to watch it now. This is supposedly. I mean, you may think there's lots of documentaries about the moon landing. Yes, there are. This is supposed to be a unique one because it's done specially for the 50th anniversary, and supposedly contains some brand new information that's not been seen before. So some amateur footage as well. There's some people with movie cameras on. You know, they had cine film cameras on the day, which is the nearest thing they had in the 60s to your mobile phone camera, and the one I've got now, this Sony camcorder. But people made their own cine films of the launch, and that's going to be in it. There's new interviews, a new perspective, new commentary. So it's supposedly going to be it is going to be different to previous documentaries. So I'm curious to see what it's like. The reason I'm primarily going along to this, I think I'll try walking again now. The reason I'm going along to this is because I want to see if they put in anything kind of like to try and discredit people like me. So, in other words, some documentaries do this. Some of them do it openly. Like there's one called Why We Landed on the Moon or something like that. It's one of the debunking skeptic documentaries which actively and openly try and take on people like us who disbelieve the official story of the Apollo moon landings. And there's others which are just, they're nominally just documentaries, but they have within them sort of very hinting and tacit references to our position, and they are putting these in just to sort of like it's a kind of nudge people in a direction without saying it openly into discrediting people like us and promoting the official story. I'm curious to see if that is in there. Now, Marcus Allen has been to see this. Indeed, he sent me an email of his review, and I wonder, I'm going to see if it's actually on the Owlist website, because owlist.com I do recommend. If you want to know more about this, I'll see if it is actually on the Owlist website, in which case I'll read it out. I'm not going to read out any private correspondence he sends to me, but I will read it out if it's been published. Because I didn't actually read it before. Like I said, I don't like to read reviews before I've seen the movie, and you'll notice this. I will be going through some of the reviews as usual when I've seen the movie, but I dislike very much this notion that this is the bike track here. I'm just going to cross over to the footpath through here. I do dislike very much this idea that I dislike the people or the situations where people watch the reviews or they read the reviews before they've actually seen the film themselves. So they go in there having read the reviews in the papers, and there's people who say, right, well, this is a good one, I'll read the reviews first, and if the critics don't like it, I'm not going to go and see it. And I'm like, what? And then you're letting the critics do your thinking for you. You're not thinking for yourself. Oh, I've had a rant about this before. I'm not going to repeat the rants I've had before. But in these critics, they say, oh, it's a memorable tour de force, and things like that. And they say, oh, that's good, it's wonderful. I mean, I've read things like this, like that Crash film. The one based on a J.G. Ballard novel. There's 2 films called Crash. You know, everyone was raving about how wonderful it was. The critics in The Guardian and The Telegraph and these other places, they were raving about how wonderful this film Crash was. And I watched it and I thought, what a load of pseudo-intellectual garbage. Honestly, it's a mixture of like, it's a mixture of like shock art in terms of, you know, sexual explicitity and things like that, which is simply designed for sensation, and a lot of kind of like fake synchro-mystical stuff. It was bullshit, absolute bullshit, awful film. All the critics were giving it 5 stars. Oh, wasn't it wonderful? You've got to see Crash. It was a load of bollocks. Conversely, you know, like the Avengers movie, the first Avengers movie, based on the TV series Avengers, the critics panned it. They actually panned it 1 star, 1 star. We're talking how awful it was. I think that's what they said. A wonderful TV series completely eviscerated and ruined by a cheap movie script with no depth at all. You know, the Steed and Mrs. Peel characters were completely and utterly incompatible. There's no chemistry between them, etc., etc. Well, I watched the film and I loved it. I thought it was the first Avengers movie was very colourful, it was a very colourful kind of, a very colourful, what am I looking for? I'm starting to talk like them now, aren't I? Stylish, I thought it was. Stylish and colourful, and I quite liked it, and it was funny. It had a good sense of humour, and the critics said, oh, Sean Connery's playing himself again. Well, so what? He was the August of Winter, he was the bad guy, but he was really pretty good. It's pretty good, and there was Eddie Izzard in it, before he went crazy and became a pink-hatted Ramona buff. He was pretty good. So, what I'm saying is, like, there's this ridiculous phrase, defying the critics, as if the critics have some kind of authority over us. They do not. They have no authority over us at all. You're not obliged to go along with what they say. And firstly, certainly, I advise not listening to a damn word they say until you have seen whatever they are talking about yourself, without any influence from them at all. This is why I will not look at any of the reviews, even including Marcus's, until I have seen this film for myself. Not that Marcus is one of the critics. Marcus is as likely to get a job writing for The Guardian as David Icke is to get a knighthood. Yeah, so where are we now? Just going to check, see where we're going. I think I'll best go through the park. I'll go through the parks rather than along the roads, because it's much nicer. I've got to go to Walton Street, which is this way. It's quite it's a sinister thing. I mean, John Ronson, who, as you know, I'm not his biggest fan. In his 1998 documentary about, he did like a discussion program which included Marcus. Matthew Williams was in it too. I remember. Yeah, he said, you know, the wool has been pulled over the eyes of all the conspiracy theories. This is probably the most coherent, and you'll agree that's a pretty sinister amount of wool. Now, this is before he went full skeptic, but that's absolutely true. It is an extremely worrying thing, which is why there's a reason why some people react against it. It's not that they can refute it. It's not that they can refute it logically. It's they just don't like that. They hate the idea of it so much that they react in an emotional way against it. Indeed, that goes for a lot of things, the things that I talk about. And it's the reason why I'm so unpopular among certain groups of people. They literally don't like it. It frightens them, and I understand that. It frightened me when I first started looking into it. And as it would happen, in the seat of learning here in Oxford, this is the science area, which I've done a video called Oxford Secret Science, and over there we have an observatory. It is actually astronomers who are the main supporters of the NASA position, but not one of them would come onto the Apollo detectives and defend it. That observatory is probably not much good now because too many tall buildings have been built around it since, but obscuring its view. Too much light pollution. But astronomers, funnily enough, it's synchronistically to see that observatory there. I don't know if there's still a telescope in it, but they are the principal defenders of the official story of the moon landings, and people like, you know, James Oberg, Jay Windley. There are people, these people do speak out. Funny thing about James Oberg is he was commissioned by NASA to write a book saying why the moon landings were real and why people like me were talking crap. He was actually commissioned by NASA to write it. Anyway, NASA, well, he was halfway through writing it and NASA withdrew their commission. I don't know why. I mean, I've not looked into it in detail, but Oberg said he would continue to write the book anyway. I don't know if the book's been published. I'm not sure. I don't think it has. I'd probably have seen it if it had been published, but I'll look out for that. Funny, NASA went through it's almost like they decided to go back to their old tactic, because their original tactic at the time Ronson did his documentary, or did his discussion program For the Love Of. You can find it on YouTube, actually. At that time, NASA were just ignoring us. Then they started replying to us and responding to us with various pieces of propaganda. Then they went back to ignoring us. It's almost like they went full circle and decided to go back to their original tactic. So, what they're doing. So, whether that changes or not, now we're at the 50th anniversary, I don't know. But there's going to be, I mean, if it's not in this particular film, if it's not in this particular film that I'm going to go and see now, it'll be in others. It'll be in the various TV spots that come out in response to the 50th anniversary, to mark the 50th anniversary. It'll be in response. There will be either specialist debunking programs, that is, those that specifically are set up to discredit people like me, or it'll be, like I say, the tacit version. It will be the guy who on the TV who makes various veiled references and insults towards people like me. You know, if I say something about how there's all the backfilling, you know, like about the dangers they faced in the Van Allen belts and solar flares and things like that, which only came out after the mission. But literally, NASA only started talking about this after the missions were over, and Bill Kaysing and others started speaking out. It was only then that it was only at that point that people started. That NASA started saying, "Oh, yeah, this is what we did about. This is our position on the Van Allen belts. This is our position on solar flares and things like that." Just to reiterate the point, it's going to be mentioned again. It's been mentioned before on this channel. The Van Allen radiation belts they're basically a zone of intense radioactive particles around the Earth. It's caused by the Earth's magnetic field interacting with solar winds, that is, charged particles coming from the sun. And it's something that was theorised since the particles were found in ice and things like that. But it was only actually detected in 1957 with early Explorer satellites. It was even 1958 or 59, I think, the first geophysical year. And well, this has all changed. I don't know where we're going now. Find a way through. And when John F. Kennedy made his announcement, we're going to send a man to the moon and bring him safely back to Earth by the end of this decade, very little was known about the Van Allen belts, how big they were, how intense they were, how high was the various, because it turns out there were two belts, how high were they, how intense was the radiation, and how do they fluctuate, even more important, how do they fluctuate with the 11-year solar cycle, the sunspot cycle? Because the Apollo missions were launched in the solar maximum. We're in the solar minimum now, so there's very few solar flares. In the solar maximum, there's regular solar flares. These solar flares are massive bursts of X-ray energy, coronal mass ejections, very intense radioactive. Very intense radioactivity which we feel on the surface of the Earth in the form of interference with radio waves and things like that, and the aurora we see in the sky, especially if you're in high latitudes. In space, there's nothing. Nothing to protect you from this intense radiation. We're underneath the ionosphere and the atmosphere. Okay, I'm going to cross the road now. That's Keeble College, which seems to be wrapped up in a... I have to go to the Pelican Crossing, I'm not sure. I think it's alright. It's Keeble College there, all wrapped up in a big, huge scaffolding. It's a beautiful, the light of the world is in there, it's lovely. I mean, even if you're not a Christian, you might like it. It's an icon of... There's a doorway and there's a guy on one side and there's Jesus on the other. And it's interesting, there's only one handle on the door. It's on the door facing the man, which means it's symbolic of how you have to open the door to let Jesus in. He can't come in if you don't let him. And it's a nice imagery. I'm not a Christian, but I do like that imagery. I think it's very touching. No one ever calls Oxford a red brick university, is it? Because they look down, the term red brick university is used to look down, which Oxbridge uses to look down on, say, universities like Birmingham and Sheffield and Nottingham and places like that. But Keeble College is made of red bricks. So how does that figure? Anyway, nearly there now, I've got to cross over again. As I said, the Van Allen bus, and now if one of the Apollo missions were launched, as you know, as I explained, like the Apollo mission was launched on the 16th of July, it took the 17th, 18th, 19th, so on the fourth day of the mission that they actually got to the moon and landed. And so this craft was travelling faster than anyone had ever travelled before. They had to go into lunar orbit and land. Now, if there'd been a major solar flare during that time, would they not get anyone back? Now, NASA say, oh yeah, we monitor them carefully, we know when they're going to happen. That's not true. As you know, if you listen to my space weather reports on Panama Radio, flares can sometimes happen. They can travel very fast, and they can travel a significant proportion of the speed of light. And sometimes they can take barely 24 hours, or less sometimes, to get from the sun to the Earth. Which means the astronauts would have been caught in this very high radiation burst. This would certainly have killed them, and it wouldn't have been pleasant. I mean, it would have been rather like you see people in radiotherapy chambers where their skin burns and things like that. It would have been like that. They get like kind of sunburn-like thing. It would have been awful. All on live TV. And the response you often get is, well, the astronauts knew the risk. This is why they were so brave, risking their lives, and they were lucky. Well, it's easy to say that afterwards, but not beforehand. So that's another reason I think we should be suspicious. Another reason why I mean, there's so many different aspects to this, but we talk about them in more details in the Apollo Detectives, and there's all kinds of other areas of this, but I mean, that's basically one of the most important factors about why we should question the official story of the moon landings, in my view. Okay, I'm getting close now, so I'm just going to, here we are. You may recognise this place from previous videos. Got to get to the cinema now. Here we go. Okay, we're on Walton Street now. This is Oxford University Press there. heading towards the cinema. There's one good thing I forgot to mention this earlier, and I should have actually mentioned it because it's a bit of a white pill. I think that the mainstream media productions on the Apollo moon landings over the next month are going to be probably quite enjoyable. At least they're going to be more bearable than they would have been otherwise. And the reason is, as Jarrell White has informed me, Australia is bringing out its own version of that in terms of its various TV programs about the Apollo moon landings. And Professor Brian Cox is going to be in Australia for a month presenting them, which means we in Britain are going to have a break from him. He will not be inflicting himself on my country. Instead, the Aussies will have to put up with him for a change. And I'm sorry to apologies for all my Australian viewers. Good. I'm being completely selfish here. You have him. You sit down, you bite your nails for a change. Yeah, I mean, Cox, there's not a lot I need to say about Cox. He is an acid offender, but his defence is it's a kind of mindless, sort of outspoken, but it's just anger and calling names right now. He's the worst example. Of course, all of them do things like this. All of them. Every one of them. They all do things like this. Hello. Oh, not for me, thanks, mate. And you.
I'll try.
And so he's like not. It's not like he even says anything really coherent like some of them do, like people like Oberg and that. They don't try to make a rational case. Nick Colostrum apparently is a pro-NASA on this. Nick, of course, as you know from the videos I've done with him, is very, very sceptical of many things, sceptical of the sea, but he believes the official story of NASA. And he did a debate with Marcus Allen, actually. I'm very much looking forward to seeing the recording of that. It should be available soon. Cox, he just calls people knobbers and says, "We don't want you." Someone called it Stargazing Live and they sent an email saying the moon landing and say, "Go and watch ITV." He said, "We don't want you, go away." And that's his position. There's an outtake from BBC Horizon where you see him kind of like... He doesn't make any rational point. He says believing that the moon landings were fake is the equivalent of believing that, North America doesn't exist, which is a completely false analogy. And he, as a scientist, should at least concede that, but he won't. That's the kind of guy he is, unfortunately.
It's not on. It was a tape.
And we're here. Phoenix Picture House. Oh, here's Picture House. It's not Picture Palace. Here's Phoenix Picture House, you see. Yeah. As you remember, I watched Dr. Strangelove here with Mark Devlin. I actually invited Mark to this particular event, but he can't make it, unfortunately. So it'd be nice to have his input anyway. But here's some of the films that are showing, and this is the one I'm going to see. So immediately we have some reviews: mesmerising, awe-inspiring, jaw-dropping by the Daily Mirror. Oh, the Guardian. One of the most outstanding space films ever made, man. And there it is. There's this video, a film by Todd Douglas Miller, Apollo 11. Feel free to pause and read, ladies and gentlemen, the credits here. And there's, well, as you know, there's something a bit odd about that picture. Dr. David Groves talked about that. But anyway, that's what I'm going to go and see, so better go in there and get my ticket. I've just come out now and I'm blinking in the sunlight. Just been to see that film. 3:15 is it now. I'm just going to... It's all dark in there. It's like, it always happens when you come out of the flicks. It's like, my eyes haven't adjusted to the light, so I'm just going to let my eyes adjust and then I'll say a few more words. I'm just going to go home now. I'll find somewhere better to film. Okay, I'm at Rhodes House now. I'm walking down South Park Road. towards on my route home. I've sort of like collected my thoughts a bit about what I'm going to say as I walk past this rather amazing building, which is where Southern Africa is controlled from and has been for quite a long time. If you see my video about that. The film itself, Apollo 11. Oh, it's quite something actually. It's quite an experience, and rather like my when I went to the Extinction Rebellion meeting, it's hard not to get carried away by the passion of the whole thing. And it's a very passionate film. I mean, the cinema, I should point out actually, before the film started, there were lots of ads. And there was an advert for Omega watches, and then I have Charlie Duke, the mission control guy. The Omega watch was worn by the astronauts, Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong. They had an extra long strap that went all the way around their wrists, with their spacesuits on, and Steve Mumbling and I have been discussing. Had an extra long strap, but it's their first watch on the moon. So Omega are capitalising on this now. It's actually there's no narration in this documentary. There's no new interviews. There's some digital images in it, some insets and things like that, and but basically it's a collection of archive footage, and I do believe some of it is new. Some of it has not been seen before. I don't remember seeing any of it before. Some of the scenes I don't remember seeing before, but it's all good quality stuff. I mean, some of it might have been cleaned up a bit, electronically. It's quite likely. But there's some really great camera work, and it's the sort of thing I think you can only appreciate in the cinema. But the rocket, for example, when the rocket's being launched, you before it's launched, there's lots of footage of the rather vertiginous camera work on the gantry and walkways leading to the rocket, because the rocket was over 300 feet high, and it's quite it makes your head spin a bit. And of course, this is an effect you can't repeat on TV. You have to watch it on the big screen for that kind of effect, and so that's quite something when you're sitting in a cinema and you're seeing that, and it's quite amazing. The colours, I think it has been enhanced with the colours, because some of the footage I've seen before, but then there's the colours, bright colours and things, and there's footage of the astronauts putting their spacesuits on before they put the spacesuits on before they go to the launch pad. The three astronauts, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, Mike Collins, and interspersed with that is some sort of footage of the people who've come to watch, and there was an official watching space where the members of the press and the astronauts' families could stand and watch. But there was also a few miles away, within sight of the rocket, there were large thousands and thousands of people had gathered, and you see images of sort of like amateur footage or sort of handheld camera footage of these people who are sleeping in their cars. They set up tents, and you see little vignettes of them wandering around, and there's like a toilet hut and things like that, and they're cooking on barbecues, they're cooking breakfast on barbecues, and they're lying on deck chairs, and some of them are sitting on the roofs of their cars, which of course you could do in those days because cars were much more robust, and modern cars, you try and sit on the roof, you'll leave a big dent in it, but things like that. That gave it a feeling of vividness, a feeling of being there. There was a fly on the wall feel to much of the footage, and that includes the footage of the launch itself, the astronaut inside the space center, because the rocket is wheeled out. The rocket is assembled in this big factory building, and it is wheeled to the launch pad on this huge vehicle with caterpillar tracks, known as the Mighty Tortoise, I believe. Huge, enormous caterpillar tracks, and goes along this little track, this gravel track, and then I mean, there is a score to this film. It's music, and there's no narration, as I said, but it's all old footage, and old photographs, there's little clips of photographs, things like that. But you have this amazing suspense, this tension builds up in it, Amazing sort of tension that you find out, and it's hard not to get carried away with that. It's hard not to get swept up in that emotion. It's the filmmakers, a skilled filmmaker can do that, and it's it's an intense experience when you're in the cinema, especially. I think you may not get this if you watch it on TV, and to find yourself sort of immersed. It's a very immersive kind of thing when they make films like this. And there's this nail-biting moment leading up to the launch where they have the countdown and everything, and then you get some real close-up shots of the rocket engines firing. I've not seen those before. Maybe they're digital reproductions. They may be, again, footage that's not been shown before. And there's many of these nail-biting moments. It's like the whole film is a series of these nail-biting moments, which, of course, in a real situation where the Apollo missions actually happened, which the way we've been told, which I don't believe they did, every single one of them could, anything went wrong, would easily, almost certainly have resulted in the death of all the astronauts. For example, when I've explained before, for instance, when they land on the moon, will the engine work when they come down? Otherwise they'll crash on the moon. Will it work? Will the ascent stage work so they can get back off the moon? If anything went wrong at any time, they could be killed. They could be stranded on the moon. And as I've said before, there's no hope of rescue. If you can't get the engine to work, you're stuck there until your oxygen supply runs out. A couple of days probably, and then you're dead. And there's no way they can get you back. I think I've talked about that before. These various nightmare scenarios, each one of them was just a tiptoe away. It's the ultimate in tempting fate, these lunar missions. And on the Rich Planet show about this, Richard E. Hall makes a good point that the success rate was pretty incredible when you consider there were 7 lunar landing missions altogether: 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Only one major malfunction occurred in any of them, 13. And even then, it had a happy ending. The astronauts did get home. You may have seen the movie with Tom Hanks and Kevin Bacon. That is a track record that's unprecedented anywhere else in the space program. No one was lost. The nightmare, what was it? The speech that was released afterwards, years later, a speech had been published, which was a speech the president would have given in those circumstances. Those who chose to go to the moon for the peace of all will now rest in peace. Oh God, that was what he would have said. The speech was already written for him before the rockets even launched. Of course, they didn't tell the astronauts that, did they? They wouldn't want them reading that before they get on the run the rocket. Things like that. And of course, for the first part, I don't seriously have a problem with the first part of the film because that covered the launch of the rocket, which of course I don't dispute. I don't dispute a rocket was launched. I'm not one of these people who says, "Oh, the rocket launch was faked." They had to cover up the flat Earth, so they paid all the people watching. Just pretend you saw a rocket. No, I don't believe all that. The rocket was launched. What's more, the rocket was launched probably, almost certainly, with the named astronauts inside it. There's actually footage of them getting into the capsule, which I don't think has been shown before. So the rocket was launched. What happens then is the translunar injection, TLI. You hear the mission control, Charlie Duke, say go for TLI, which means translunar injection, which means that's the point where they fire the rocket, which wouldn't have been powerful enough, as Phil Coutts has just discovered, if you read Nexus magazine, to get them, to give them enough change of velocity to leave Earth orbit altogether and head for the moon. That's another of these nail-biting moments, because if that didn't work, it wouldn't have been so bad, because they could have just come back to Earth. Once they're on the TLI, once they're actually left Earth orbit, that's it, you're in space. They have to get to the moon and then slow down, and of course, then they had to use another rocket engine which had to work perfectly. That's the one on the command module. That had to work perfectly twice, actually, because it had to get them into lunar orbit. Now, if that had failed, they'd just carried on flying off into space. That's another nail-biting moment. Will the lunar orbit insertion, LOI. Will that work? That's the next thing they do. Go for LI. Go for LOI. So there's a lot of these feelings of tension. I mean, there's lots of close-ups on people's faces in this film. It's well made. It's a skillfully made movie. You know, it's like, you know, maybe shoot them go out as the rocket goes up. They go. You see them following the cameras, and they've got the telescopes. They're watching the rocket go up. And so this is very. You can hear the noise of the rocket. It's all very, very visceral. Actually, the launch. You hear the noise of the rocket in ways you haven't heard it. You won't have heard it on previous films. Now, of course, this could well be a digital recreation. Fine. So it's a radiophonic reproduction. But God, it's effective. It's really effective. Just gonna sit down for a minute. My sciatica's kicking in. Oh, this is awful, isn't it? I just hope the exercises work. Like, otherwise, I'm just going to be like this. I'm just sitting down now. Oh, it hurts. Oh, that's painful. Oh, yeah. It's like it'll wear off in a minute. Now, it's interesting that Neil Armstrong. There's a recording of Neil Armstrong reading off radiation readings as they head through the Van Allen belts. And as I said, I was looking out for little things like this, things which are a kind of elbow in the ribs kind of response to things that I have said, and people like Marcus Allen and Jarrell White and Andrew Johnson and all these other people have said. A little kind of nudge, nudge, wink, wink, saying, look, this is what these loonies are saying, here's how they're wrong. Now, that could be interpreted as such a thing. But you know what? That's the only part of the film where that happened. I really don't think it was a film meant for us or for people looking at us. I really don't think it was that kind of film. I really don't. Now, there is a sense of, there's lots of like anecdotal shots. Like I said, there's no narration, but you have a guy, there's also a guy going around with a handheld camera taking videos in the Mission Control Centre. And this is obviously things that you may not have seen, may well not have been shown before. I've not seen them before. You see people in the refectory queuing up for cups of tea and coffee and food, and there's a TV on. There's this interesting shot where they're all queuing up for dinner. These are obviously the staff at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Houston, and there's news footage playing, and it's news of the Vietnam War, which of course it's important to look at the backdrop to the Apollo missions and how it was all relevant to what was happening in the 60s. I mean, see, the thing is, like, I don't remember this just before I was born, but for those who were alive at the time and adults and mature at the time, and my parents have told me about this, they watched it all on TV and everything. You know, they stayed up and they watched the lunar mission. I mean, loads of people did. This was, of course, we have 24-hour TV now, but there was a time, you know, we used to get the shutdown. They used to play the national anthem and the TV used to shut down for the night. Now, this was the all-night broadcast. I don't know if it was the first one, but it was an all-night broadcast. And people were sitting up and watching it. They got, you know, drinking beer and drinking coffee and watching the guys walk on the moon. I mean, in Europe, like we're here, I mean, in Europe, it was literally. This was the early hours of the morning. It landed at 8 p.m. The landing was at 8 p.m. and the lunar excursion actually began around 2 a.m. our time, universal time. Well, in those days it would be British summertime, so like about 1 a.m. You know. So that's like a kind of that's an example of what I mean. People were glued to that, and of course, in the 1960s there was a lot of fear. It was a decade of strife. It was a decade of social collapse in a way, in many ways, and unrest, and people questioning values they hadn't previously questioned. There was, of course, the Cold War. This was the pinnacle of the Cold War. We'd had the Cuban Missile Crisis. The world was seconds away from nuclear annihilation at any time, and people were acutely aware of this. And it still is, you know, but it was worse back then. And we had the Soviet Empire and the West, capitalist West. And then the Vietnam War was a terrible period, especially for Americans. And there was massive protest. There was the civil rights movement in the States. There was students going on strike everywhere. People being shot in the streets on student campuses. Tear gas, been flying all over the place, the police with guns. We had multiple assassinations. First there was the Kennedy assassination. Then 5 years later there was there was Martin Luther King was assassinated. Then just 2 months later Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. All these events were conspiracies. They were conspiracies by the government, which the government would not acknowledge. They were all put down to lone nutters, in singular individuals who killed their targets for purely personal reasons. It was all dismissed as that, and so many people didn't believe it. This is when, in a sense, people like us were kind of like the norm for a while. People who question these things in this way, conspiracy theorists. We were the mainstream almost for a bit. And then, in the midst of all that, with the bombings going on across Southeast Asia, the world's so divided, and there was this moment, and my parents told about this, Marcus Allen has said about this too, there was this one moment when it was just all forgotten, just for a few days, everyone came together as one. It was almost like a transcendental experience. People were cheering all over the world when the craft landed, in Moscow, in Hanoi, and everywhere. People were happy that this had happened, and people really felt this was a moment when things could have turned around. And whatever the factual nature of what happened, that was how people perceived it, and this film is an illustration of that. It gives you a sense of that. And the president, there's this amazing moment actually just after the touchdown, and you hear Charlie Duke saying, "Oh, we got some guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again." And Armstrong's a Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed, and there's this panorama of a 360 image which they show, and there's this music that plays alongside it of the first landing site on the moon, allegedly. And you see, even though it's fake, and I have not changed my opinion on the factual nature of what the moon landing Apollo missions were. Nothing in that film detracts from what I've said before about the Apollo missions. It's impossible not to feel I think what some of the people at the time were feeling. I think it's really difficult not to feel those emotions. I'm going to carry on walking for a bit now. It's even if it's fake, it still has that power. It still has that existential thrust. I mean, you could say the same about a work of fiction. Surely everyone watching this at some point has watched a film that's made them weep, or read a book that has made them think about things for weeks and weeks and weeks. A fictional work, but it's made you think. It's inspired you. It's changed your life, even though it's not real. It's changed your life. This is why I write fiction. This is what I hope to write myself, books which do that for people. That's what my Roswell trilogy is about. It's not. I know it's not real. Of course it's not real, but it's a fictional allegory in that way. What happens then is it's strange, that to get back on a more sort of rational level, that on the descent footage, the film of the descent is very interesting. I mean, I've seen it before. It's got additional music. It's got the data readout of fuel levels and altitude at the side. But it's how we remember. We hear the voice of, was it Neil Armstrong or Buzz Aldrin, just reading, calmly talking. There's noise. There's kind of hissing noise in the background. Nothing else. Now on the ascent stage, you see the rocket go up, but then the rocket rises up, and you don't actually see it from the ground. I mean, the famous footage of the LEM ascent stage taking off from the ground was on the later mission. It was the lunar module TV camera that captured it on the lunar rover, and there was no rovers on the early Apollo missions. And so you see this. You just see the view from the LEM window as it lands on Apollo 11 as it takes off. And things you hear noise. You hear the distinct noise of a rocket engine. Now, of course, the skeptics will say it was the ascent stage you heard, which was different to the descent stage, but it's only a distance of a few feet. You know what I mean? It's like not much of a difference. But that's an interesting thing, along with the radiation reading, you know, that's different. Of course, that sound might have been added to the soundtrack for the purpose of the film. I'm sure the film has been, the footage has been altered for the purposes of the documentary. And of course, interestingly, there's a famous scene, I mean, I've seen it before, where they do include it, actually, where you see it's during the docking manoeuvres of the ascent stage and the command module, because again, that's another nail-biting moment. Can they actually dock these two craft? I mean, it's only ever been done a few times before. It's done once with Apollo, I think it was Apollo 9, 10, and that's it. And then, of course, on 11, they actually dock with the lunar module to pull it out of the rocket. It's a complicated thing because the command module has to turn around because the rocket is the command module sitting atop the bay where they keep the lunar module on for launch. They have to turn around and pluck the lunar module out of the rocket, dock with it, turn around and pluck it out. Complicated business, that. So would it work? Would they be able to connect to the command module? Because if that didn't work, again, you know, Neil and Buzz will be stuck there. They'll be stuck in the ascent stage orbiting the moon, and Mike Collins would have to leave them and go home. So he's going to say, sorry guys, can't get you on board. I'd say, all right, you're going to have to go home without us. And then, of course, Neil and Buzz, they'd be finished, they'd be dead, and then the LEM ascent stage would continue to orbit the moon, probably for I don't know how long, until its orbit declined, and it would the orbits deteriorate eventually, and then it would crash into the moon. There'd be a new crater called Armstrong Aldrin where the ascent stage impacted. Again, these nightmare scenarios, and it's so it just goes to show, and it's, you wouldn't want what an awful thing to contemplate happening. And of course, there's the journey back, which doesn't take up much film time. They just play a Bob Dylan song, everyone's really happy, but then of course there's the re-entry. Now, what's interesting is there's no the command module engine only fires for the lunar orbit insertion and for the Earth, the trans-Earth injection. So it fires twice for those things. Now, there's no way to slow down as they approach the Earth, right? There's no the command module does not slow down. The command and service module. What happens is they're approaching the Earth at the speed, at full interplanetary speed, which is far faster than Earth orbit speed, lower Earth orbital speed, like you see with the Soyuz craft coming down there. So it has to. It's far faster. And it hits the Earth's atmosphere. The command module separates from the service module, then it hits the Earth's atmosphere at full interplanetary speed and has to slow down by atmospheric drag, by aerobraking, from that speed to zero, basically, to when they can, or close enough to zero for them to deploy the parachutes when they reach the troposphere, the low Earth atmosphere. Now, as you know, if you read Nexus magazine, you follow Phil Kautz, you'll know that when asked about this heat shield, NASA said, we can't really remember how it was done, how we did it. We don't really have we sort of lost the plans. And you could say, well, obviously some of the command modules are still around. They're used as museum exhibits, and NASA said, we can't go to museums and start taking exhibits out, can we? Because, of course, these heat shields would be the perfect, you're going to need them again, aren't you, if you're going to go back to the moon? It's just an example of the kinds of things, and you mustn't let yourself forget these things. In the midst of all the passion and the fervour which is captured very well in this film, it really is. You can't let yourself forget that. And there's this moving moment when Neil, the last TV broadcast from space before re-entry, and Neil pays homage to all the thousands and thousands of people who worked at NASA. And I mean, one of the biggest arguments in favour of the NASA position is that too many people would have to have been involved in this conspiracy for them to keep it quiet. And well, I have explained on previous videos, and I'll explain on a future one as well, exactly why that couldn't happen. Exactly why it is possible to keep a conspiracy like that. It is perfectly possible, unfortunately, using compartmentalization and simply giving people a certain mindset and relying on the herding instinct. And I mean, in the upcoming Apollo Detectives video, there's a perfect example of that, which Jarrah White brings up, and it involves geologists analysing moon rock. They're literally confronted with the inevitable evidence. I don't want to spoil it for you, but I'll tell you what it is. These geologists are confronted, or selenologists if you want to be pedantic, they're confronted with a rock that supposedly was brought back to the moon by Apollo 14, and they say, well look, this is a rock from the Earth. And so, rather than questioning NASA, because NASA have sent them this, they've had to go through special requests and pay a lot of money for NASA to send them this official moon rock from the official storage, and rather than accuse NASA of saying, look, unfortunately NASA, you've sent us an Earth rock by mistake, which is obviously the most likely outcome, isn't it? They come up with some cock and bull story, which is why, well, this is a piece of meteorite which must have come off the Earth in a cometary impact long ago, and it's landed on the moon. And by an extraordinary piece of bad luck, the astronauts happened to pick it up with their samples for Apollo 14. They'd rather come up with a incredibly unlikely scenario than that, than accuse NASA of lying. And that's an example of tacit compliance. It's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. And I'll tackle that in more detail in the upcoming Apollo Detectives film. Yeah. The end of these closing credits, you have like a big. I'll just show you. Actually, there's where the punts come and go. Did you see that? That's the punt. This is the terminus for the punt. So if you ever come to Oxford, do that. Take a boat out on the river. Anyway, in the closing credits, they have like a list of all the people who worked on the project Apollo, and it's like superimposing, and it's sort of superimposed over the number 11, including the astronauts, but then everyone, the 3 astronauts, but then everyone else as well. So what I'm going to do in a minute is I'm going to read you some reviews from the media, and if I can, from another alternative researcher. But obviously, the actual nature of this film is pretty, as far as in evidential terms, is pretty irrelevant. There's nothing in it which disputes anything that I've said or other alternative Apollo investigators have said about the Apollo missions, and it doesn't even try to, really. I wouldn't call it propaganda. It's not propaganda. It is a film by people who really love space and love the idea of the moon missions and want to communicate that in film, in cinematic form. You can see the passion. You can see the love they put into it, the passion they put into it. And you know what? I sympathise now. I think if anything, if watching this Apollo 11 film has actually changed me in any way, it's not changed my opinion on the factual nature of the missions, as I said, but I think perhaps I feel a bit more sympathy now for people like Steve Mumbling and for James Oberg and these other NASA apologists. I feel more sympathy for them. I think I understand more, perhaps, about the emotional side of them, which leads them to take the position they do regarding Apollo. And their animosity for people like me who come along and say, actually, this is not what it seems to be. And it's not an apology to them. I don't apologise to them. I never apologise to anyone for saying something which I believe is true. However inconvenient or upsetting that truth might be. But I feel like maybe I understand them better than I did before I saw that film. I think maybe I understand why they feel as they do. So, and now, what do the papers say? And what the papers actually say is quite glowing. Actually, I think this is the best received film of any of the ones that I've reviewed. As you can see from Rotten Tomatoes, it's received pretty high aggregate, 90% audience score. That's quite spectacular for Rotten Tomatoes, which of course is an aggregator of reviews. But anyway, let's get down to the various news outlets and what the critics have said for various newspapers. So, just for a change, I'm going to begin with The Scotsman. So I'll be doing my Scotsman voice, of course. I'm not read a review from The Scotsman, but here's what they have to say. And yes, it's very complimentary. Awe-inspiring cinematic experiences are few and far between, but Apollo 11 is precisely the sort of film that's worth seeing on the biggest screen possible for this very reason. That's true, actually. I think to appreciate this film, rather like I don't know if you read my written review on My Voice of Arrival, you can't really appreciate that on a small screen. To get especially the panoramic views of the launch, you need a big screen. You need to be able to see it at the cinema, definitely. A documentary drawn from thousands of hours of gorgeous, never-before-seen footage of the immediate build-up to, launch of, and return of the first moon landing. It plays like a Robert Altman film that just happens to have been made in the midst of one of the most significant human achievements of the 20th century. I don't know Robert Altman, what he's like. Anyway, directed and edited by Todd Douglas Miller, this film makes brilliant use of pristine 70mm footage plus to place us in the moment, setting the scene with stunning shots of huge trucks firing massive rockets to Cape Canaveral, and a moment that helps convey both the majesty and the mundanity of everything involved in getting Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin and Michael Collins into space. Miller's commitment to found footage format is what really makes the film special. That's true, actually. I've been looking it up on Wikipedia. There are no recreations. I thought some of it might have been digitally enhanced, or maybe there may even be some CGI in it. There's not. It says here the film consists solely of archival footage, including 70mm film previously unreleased to the public. Yeah, and does not feature narration, interviews, or modern recreations. That's absolutely true. And indeed, The Scotsman goes on to say, there are no talking head interviews, no after-the-fact remembrances, no contextualizing of the footage beyond venerable US anchorman Walter Cronkite's reports from the time. Instead, the film trusts the historical record and trusts that by immersing us in the control rooms and in the crowds lining the highways and byways of the Florida coast, it's estimated that almost 1 million people turned out to watch the launch. That's more than I said, a few thousand, but 1 million people turned out. That's quite something. It can convey the drama and spectacle in a much purer way. That's actually a very good review there by The Scotsman. That's actually, I would say that's pretty much as I saw it. So, yeah, as I said, true or false, it matters not. For the people watching, it's the same thing, and that counts for the media across the board, I think. And now I'm going to continue with the Tory graph. Yes. Apollo 11 Review, a tribute to human achievement and the beautiful loneliness of outer space. Director Todd Miller, Certificate U, 93 minutes. Damien Chazelle's Neil Armstrong biopic First Man sputtered on the launch pad last year. Its 4 Oscar nominations were confined to the more obscure technical categories. Actually, I never saw First Man. I remember I told you I was going to go and review it, and I didn't. I know Marcus reviewed it. I never got to see it. You know why? It was because I was publishing Roswell Redeemed. So that's, of course, everything gets in the way of that, doesn't it? Yeah. I remember when I was publishing Roswell Revealed when ATIP came out. Yeah. But Apollo 11 did actually receive. It's so far not been nominated. It's been nominated. It's not been nominated for Golden Globes or Oscars or anything. But it has won the Stephen Hawking Medal for Science Communication, which is interesting. It premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in February, and it actually won the Special Jury Award for Editing, which I can well believe. I mean, it is superbly edited. And it was nominated for the US Documentary Grand Prize, Jury Prize. So, yeah, it's already received quite a few glowing reports. Anyway, they carry on. The film reckoned well and refused to condemn. All right, I think they're going, but still talking about First Man. The film reckoned with and refused to condemn an old-fashioned idea of masculinity, slightly suffering, never complaining, as embodied by the stoic Armstrong. This may have been out of step with the message that the Academy in more enlightened times made wish to convey. Nevertheless, hugs and manly tears are equally absent from Todd Douglas Miller's retelling of the first manned mission to the moon. Is that a criticism from the Tory graph? I thought, it's normally they resist the old SJW stuff, but anyway. Utilising a trove of NASA footage that's never been seen before, Miller's hang on, oh right. Oh, I've got to register to read the rest of it. Oh, bloody hell, can't be bothered. No, I can't be bothered. Oh, right. I've got to pay. No, sorry. That's it from the Daily Telegraph, I'm afraid. Yeah, it's again, it sounds like they're very impressed by it. I can see just from that introductory little segment there. So again, full marks from the Telegraph for Apollo 11. And now finally we come to the Guardian. And of course, Professor Brian Cox has a column in the Guardian, as I've said many times, which I think says an awful lot. Anyway, 5 stars. Apollo 11 review, eye-opening documentary that's a 5-star triumph. An exceptional, vibrant restoration of never-before-seen footage results in one of the most astounding films about space ever made. The documentary, this is, who's written this? Oh, this is by Isabel, oh no, hang on, no, that's somebody else. Who's written this? Oh, it doesn't say who. Oh, Adrian Horton, that's it. Adrian Horton. Is he a white male? I bet you, is he white? He can't be white, surely not. Ugh, white men. This is the Guardian, after all. Anyway, the documentary Apollo 11 starts as the famous mission did in Cape Canaveral, Florida. Trucks ferrying massive rocket props, rocket props? It's a bit of a joke. They're props, of course, what you get in a studio, don't you? Machinery grinds as it would in construction zones. The sky is crystal blue. The scene is, in a word, vibrant, so startlingly alive that for the first few minutes I wasn't sure if I was watching footage from 1969 or a NASA promo shot from last year, man. The presentness is one of the film's major feats. That's true, actually. Presentness. That's a good word. I was wondering how do you describe this feeling of that it is like contemporary, and it's because of this very, very good quality 70mm footage, and it could be like what watching something technical like the rocket going up and the astronauts getting in there, or it could be something as mundane as I said earlier, people in the cafeteria at Jet Propulsion Laboratory drinking coffee. Todd Douglas has found a brilliant way to portray the first moon landing by doing nothing more than a gargantuan task of faithfully rejuvenating the historical record. The documentary is a seamless curation of archival work, and it talks about his details, how his partnership with NASA and the National Archives resulted in hyper-detailed 70mm footage that has been languishing in archives, boxed up and forgotten since 1969. Yeah, that is quite an achievement, actually. The result is a stunning project of historical preservation. No narration, no cutaway interviews, no recreations. Again, that's good, isn't it? Yeah, just original material synced with some music and the occasional diagram. Yes, that's true. That's what the Scotsman said, and it's correct. And it's Apollo 11 arrives early in the mission's 50th anniversary year, which means the significance of the nation's space program, man. And it goes into a few details here. Apparently, Damien Chazelle, he worked on the First Man or directed it or something. He actually helped with this as well. Oh, excuse me. Yeah. It's yeah. They call it is quite. It is stunning in that way, I must say. Yeah, I must say. The 93-minute film was anchored by 4 pivotal moments in the Apollo 11 mission: liftoff, the landing of the Eagle, lunar module on the moon, reconnecting with Eagle, and the Columbia spacecraft return home and re-entry to Earth's atmosphere. Yeah, it's with all that technology they've now lost. Yes, but it's yeah, it is like. It's exciting, I must admit, and it talks about the thump of a heartbeat. I'm not going to read everything here. It's genuinely moving hypnotic odes to, yeah, it is. It is. And it talks on here about the incredible footage of the crowds who watched the mission. Yeah, that was nice. That, you know, it's interesting. They were the Maxwell, that not Maxwell House, but Coffee Mate. They would have like jars of Coffee Mate. That's one scene I do remember from the film. Jars of Coffee Mate on the roofs of cars as the people a million people gathering there in Florida to watch the launch. Yeah. I'm just going to press pause and flick through this. So I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's quite a long review, but I'm just going to flick through it quickly. Okay, I found something I want to review, and I'm not going to do it in my normal Guardian voice because I don't want to take the piss. This is a very perceptive sentence that the critic has come up with here. It's really amazing. There is a deep pleasure, especially now, in immersive historical voyeurism, in the illusion that we can transcend the limitations of our own time and understand another collective experience. That's actually very, very true. That's a very, very for the Guardian. That is astonishingly intellectual. I really, really do find that an amazing way of putting it. And as I said, despite my own beliefs about Apollo 11 and indeed the entire space program, which have not changed one iota as a result of watching this film, I do understand this sentiment very much indeed. And it takes I wouldn't even say, I can't really say for sure because I don't know what not to have these beliefs feels like, but I don't really see that my beliefs takes an awful lot away from my appreciation of that element of the film. I don't have much more to add to this particular video and this particular subject. I will be covering the Apollo missions and the moon landings in future videos. Indeed, as I've said before, we're doing another Apollo Detectives, which is already in the can. But I think if there's one point to make here, it is that the reality that does not necessarily have to mean real. Almost paradoxically, something can have a massive amount of existential weight and not be real. In a sense, the Apollo 11 moon mission is a magnificent piece of moving theatre or fiction. It has the power to make people laugh and cry, and it can unify the world in the same way that sometimes a song can, or a story, or indeed a movie that is openly fictional rather. So I don't think there's anything wrong with me enjoying this film. I mean, I enjoyed the Apollo 11 movie. I thought it was great, and it's in a sense, my views, my opinions on the reality of the Apollo missions, in other words, I think it's fake. I don't know if that actually changed how I felt or would have felt had they been different, had those views been different. I can't put myself in the shoes of someone who believes that the Apollo 11 missions really landed men on the moon. I can't put myself in the mindset of what those people think. As I've said earlier, I think I sympathise with them more than I used to, having watched this film. But I can't be them, so I don't know. But it's interesting how the mind works. It's interesting about how people are. What an amazing, sometimes infuriating, but really wonderful creature we are. And I'll have a lot more to say about the Apollo moon missions in the coming weeks. Also, check out her Panway Radio. I'll be doing an interview with Marcus Allen, so that's coming up as well. Thank you all of you for watching. Hospital Porters, Pride and Dignity. Stop the New World Order.